Forms of disrespect you should never forgive. And I want to begin by doing something that the title of this episode is going to make some people immediately uncomfortable, which is to challenge the word never, not to soften it, not to replace it with something more palatable or more spiritually acceptable or more aligned with the version of forgiveness that most of us have been taught as the highest and most evolved response to being wronged. I want to challenge it in the opposite direction, to ask whether never is actually strong enough for what we are about to discuss. Because the forms of disrespect in this episode are not the ordinary failures of consideration that relationships produce when two imperfect people navigate a shared life with insufficient awareness and insufficient communication. Those failures deserve something more nuanced than never. They deserve the examination that distinguishes between what was done, why it was done, what changed in response to it being named, and whether the relationship contains enough genuine goodwill and genuine capacity for growth to make working through the failure worth the work it requires. The forms of disrespect in this episode are different. They are not failures. They are not lapses. They are not the product of insufficient awareness or insufficient communication. They are communications. They are the specific, identifiable ways that someone tells you, through their behavior rather than their words, what they believe about your worth, your perception, your right to your own reality, and the conditions under which you are acceptable to them. And communications of that quality, received clearly, understood accurately, stripped of the charitable interpretations that most of us reflexively apply to the behavior of people we love or have loved or are still in proximity to, do not require forgiveness in the sense that forgiveness is usually understood. They require something else, something that is actually more useful and more honest and more protective of the person you are trying to become than forgiveness, however generously extended, can provide an understanding what that something is and why these specific forms of disrespect specifically disqualify the people who deploy them from the level of access they previously had to your life. That is what this episode is going to give you. So stay with me, because we are going to be specific, uncomfortably specific, in exactly the ways that this conversation requires. Let's start with what disrespect actually is at the level that matters, because the word gets used so broadly and so loosely that it has started to lose the precision that makes it useful. Most people use disrespect to describe a wide range of behaviors, from the genuinely trivial, the interruption, the forgotten anniversary, the dismissive tone in a moment of stress, to the genuinely significant, without always having a clear framework for distinguishing between the two in ways that appropriately calibrate the response. The disrespect in this episode is specific. It is the category of behavior that communicates, not incidentally or accidentally, but as its primary function, something about how the person engaging in it understands the fundamental nature of the person they are directing it toward. Not their behavior, not what they did in a particular situation, their fundamental nature, their worth as a person, their right to their own perception of reality, their entitlement to basic human dignity in the context of the relationship. When behavior communicates something at this level, when it says, through its pattern and its persistence and its specific quality, something about what the person doing it believes about who you fundamentally are, the appropriate response is not the forgiveness that releases the debt while leaving the debtor in position to continue incurring it. The appropriate response is the clear-eyed acknowledgement of what was communicated and the recalibration of the relationship's terms to reflect the accuracy of that acknowledgement. Not anger, not retaliation, not the performance of being wronged, the quiet, permanent, non-negotiable adjustment that reflects a genuine understanding of what the behavior revealed about the person producing it and what that revelation means for the level of access to your life that is appropriate for them to continue to have. The first form of disrespect you should never forgive is the deliberate invalidation of your perception of reality. And I want to be very precise about what deliberate means in this context, because perception can be challenged in ways that are genuinely healthy. The honest friend who tells you that you are reading a situation in a way that your history is coloring beyond what the evidence supports. The partner who gently notes that the interpretation you have arrived at is not the only interpretation available. The therapist who helps you see how a cognitive distortion is shaping what you experience as objective reality. These challenges to perception, offered in good faith by people who are genuinely interested in helping you see more clearly, are not the disrespect in this category. They are its opposite. The deliberate invalidation of your perception is something structurally different. It is the consistent, systematic, specifically targeted undermining of your ability to trust what you perceive, what you remember, what you feel, and what you know, not in the service of helping you see more clearly, but in the service of making you see less clearly, in the service of replacing your accurate perception of what is happening with an inaccurate perception that serves the interests of the person doing the replacing. This is what gaslighting actually is, beneath the popularization of the term that has softened it into something more ordinary than it is. It is the deliberate, targeted, sustained attack on your epistemic confidence, your confidence in your own ability to know what is real, for the specific purpose of making you more manageable, more doubtful, more dependent on the reality constructed by the person who is simultaneously constructing it and destroying your ability to evaluate it critically. And the reason this form of disrespect is in the never category is not primarily because of the damage it does, though the damage is real and significant and takes considerably longer to repair than the relationship that produced it typically lasted. It is because of what it communicates about the person doing it. Deliberately invalidating someone's perception of reality requires, as a prerequisite, the belief that the person's perception is less important than your ability to manage it, that their accurate experience of what is happening is less important than your ability to replace it with an experience that serves your purposes, that their fundamental capacity to know their own reality is something you are entitled to compromise in the service of your own interests. This is not a lapse. This is not a failure of communication. This is a complete account in behavioral form of what this person believes about your fundamental worth relative to their convenience. And that account, once received clearly, does not require forgiveness. It requires a permanent and complete revision of the level of access this person has to the interior of your life. The second form of disrespect you should never forgive is the weaponization of your vulnerability. And this one requires particular care in how it is described, because the line between what belongs in this category and what belongs in the category of ordinary human imperfection in the handling of intimate knowledge is a line that context and pattern and intention make clear, but that a single instance can sometimes obscure. Vulnerability shared in intimacy is the foundation of genuine connection. It is the specific thing that makes close relationships different from all other categories of human interaction. The thing that is offered when someone trusts another person enough to let them see what is not visible to the world, what is tender, what is undefended, what carries the specific kind of risk that can only exist when the thing being risked matters. And the person who receives that vulnerability and holds it with care, who does not deploy it, does not use it as material for argument or as leverage for compliance or as ammunition when the dynamic shifts, that person is demonstrating something about their fundamental orientation toward the relationship nothing and worth honoring. The person who receives vulnerability and weaponizes it is demonstrating the opposite. Who takes what was offered in trust and uses it in the specific moments when using it will cause the most damage, in the argument, in the public setting, in the context where revealing it produces the maximum impact on the person who shared it in good faith. This weaponization does not happen by accident. It requires the memory of what was shared, the recognition of its tender quality, and the deliberate choice to deploy it rather than protect it. All three of these elements, the memory, the recognition, and the choice, require a level of conscious intention that removes this behavior from the category of accidental harm and places it firmly in the category of chosen harm. And chosen harm directed at the specific place where you were most undefended is not something that a relationship can be recalibrated around in a way that allows genuine intimacy to continue, because genuine intimacy requires the safety of vulnerability. And someone who has demonstrated that your vulnerability is available to them as a weapon has permanently removed the safety that genuine intimacy requires. The relationship can continue in some form, but it cannot continue as a space where genuine intimacy is possible. And a relationship that cannot contain genuine intimacy is a relationship that has been permanently and fundamentally altered by the choice that was made, not by the conflict that was the context for the choice, by the choice itself. The third form of disrespect you should never forgive is the consistent, pattern-level disregard for your time, your energy, and your stated needs, not in the isolated instances that stress and overwhelm and the ordinary failures of consideration produce, but as a demonstrated orientation toward the relationship that persists across enough situations and enough explicit conversations about it that the pattern can no longer be attributed to oversight. Because oversight is forgiven easily and should be. The partner who forgets, the friend who is late, the colleague who does not follow through on one occasion when other demands were more pressing. These are not the disrespect in this category. The disrespect in this category is the pattern of treating your time as less important than their convenience, your energy as a resource available for their use without the reciprocity that would make the use sustainable, your stated needs as preferences that are acknowledged, and then consistently, reliably, specifically not acted on in ways that demonstrate that the acknowledgement was never the precursor to a genuine response, but simply the management of the moment in which the need was expressed. This pattern, observed clearly across sufficient time and sufficient instances, is not a communication about someone's capacity for growth or their temporary limitations or the specific circumstances that are preventing them from showing up differently than they are currently showing up. It is a communication about priority, about where you rank in the hierarchy of what matters enough to actually change behavior for. And the communication, once received and understood, does not benefit from the interpretation that things will be different given more time, more patience, more explicit articulation of the need that was already explicitly articulated in the conversations that preceded this pattern becoming undeniable. What it benefits from is the honest acknowledgement that this is the information being communicated, that it has been communicated consistently enough to be reliable, and that the appropriate response to reliable information is not continued hope that the information will change, but the clear-eyed adjustment of expectations and access that reflects what the information actually says. And what comes after the adjustment, what the forms of disrespect we have not yet discussed reveal about the people who deploy them, and why they belong in the never category with the same finality as the as we have already examined. That is exactly where we are going next. What comes after the adjustment is the clearest possible test of whether the adjustment was accurate, because the person whose disrespect produced the adjustment will respond to the adjustment in one of a small number of ways, and each response is itself information about the accuracy of the original assessment. The person who responds to your adjustment with genuine curiosity, who notices that something has changed in your availability or your openness or your engagement with them, and asks about it with the specific quality of somebody that's to understand rather than manage, is providing information that complicates the never, not necessarily reverses it, complicates it, introduces the possibility that what produced the disrespect was something other than a settled belief about your fundamental worth, something that is actually available for examination and revision, rather than something that is simply the expression of who this person is at the level that does not change without significant sustained effort of a kind that most people are not willing to undertake. This complication should be held carefully. It should not be dismissed, and it should not be acted on immediately. It should be held alongside everything that the pattern produced and evaluated over time and across behavior rather than across words, because the words that arrive in response to an adjustment are the easiest possible expression of willingness to change and the least reliable indicator of whether the change is actually occurring. What is reliable is the behavior, whether the pattern shifts, whether the specific form of disrespect that produced the adjustment appears differently in the subsequent months, not perfectly, not without relapse, but genuinely differently in a way that reflects a genuine internal shift rather than a managed performance of having shifted. That behavioral evidence, accumulated over sufficient time, is what earns the reconsideration of the never, not the words, never the words alone. The person who responds to your adjustment with indignation, who treats your recalibration of access and availability as something done to them rather than something done in response to what was done to you, who makes the adjustment about their experience of being adjusted toward rather than about the pattern that necessitated the adjustment, is providing information of a completely different quality. This response is not just the absence of the curiosity that would complicate the never. It is the confirmation of the never. Because the indignation at being held accountable for a pattern, the conversion of your self-protection into an offense, for which you are now responsible, is itself a form of the disrespect it is responding to. It is the invalidation of your perception of what happened. It is the implicit message that your experience of the pattern is not a legitimate basis for an adjustment, that your response to what was done to you is the problem rather than the thing that produced the response. And receiving this response, if you are paying the kind of attention this episode is trying to help you pay, tells you something you needed to know. It tells you that the pattern was not accidental, that the disrespect was not the product of insufficient awareness that genuine conversation could address, that the person in front of you, presented with the information that their behavior produced a specific and significant consequence, has chosen to respond to that information by making you responsible for the consequence rather than examining the behavior. And that choice, freely made in the moment when accountability was the other available option, is as clear a communication as anything the original pattern produced. It belongs in the never category with everything that preceded it. And it goes there permanently without the softening that the hope of different information would have provided. Now let's talk about the remaining forms of disrespect that belong in this category, because we have covered 3, and there are several more that appear with enough consistency in the experiences of people who have been significantly disrespected to warrant specific naming. The 4th form is the public humiliation, the deliberate undermining of your dignity, your credibility, or your self-presentation in social contexts where the undermining is witnessed by people whose opinion matters to you. And I want to distinguish this clearly from the accidental social misstep, the joke that landed wrong, the sharing of information that was thoughtlessly disclosed without the intention to harm. The public humiliation in this category is specific. It involves the deployment of knowledge about you, your insecurities, your history, your vulnerabilities, your opinions or beliefs or experiences, in a social context in a way that is designed to produce a specific effect on how you are perceived by the people present. It is the intimate partner who makes the cutting comment at the dinner party and then frames your visible hurt as oversensitivity. The family member who shares something you disclosed in private in a family gathering in a way that changes how the gathering receives you. The friend who undermines your credibility with mutual friends in a conversation you are not part of, using information that was given to them in the context of trust. All of these are the same behavior expressed through different relationships and different social contexts. They are the deliberate use of your social environment against you. The conversion of the spaces where you should be safe into spaces where you are specifically less safe because of the choices of someone who had access to what would make you less safe in them. And this conversion, this specific, chosen transformation of social safety into social threat, communicates something about the person who produces it that the never is the only accurate response to. Not because the harm it causes is unrecoverable, though it often takes significant time and effort to repair, but because producing it requires a specific orientation toward you, a willingness to use the social world as an instrument against you, to treat your dignity as a resource available for deployment in service of whatever the public humiliation was designed to produce. That does not change as a result of forgiveness. It changes, if it changes at all, as a result of the kind of deep, sustained, professionally supported psychological work that most people who engage in public humiliation are not motivated to undertake unless the consequences of not undertaking it are more significant than the consequences of continuing it. Making the consequences significant enough is the function of the never. The 5th form of disrespect that belongs in this category is the one that is perhaps most commonly encountered and most frequently minimized, both by the people who experience it and by the people they seek perspective from, and that minimization is itself a form of the harm it produces. It is the chronic, pattern-level dismissal of your emotional experience, the consistent treatment of your feelings as disproportionate, as evidence of a personal failing, as something to be managed rather than understood, as a problem you are creating for the relationship rather than information the relationship should be interested in receiving. Every relationship contains instances of this. The partner who is tired and does not have the capacity for the emotional conversation in this specific moment. The friend whose own experience is so consuming that the bandwidth for yours is temporarily unavailable. These instances are not the disrespect in this category. The disrespect in this category is the pattern, the consistent, reliable, specifically directed treatment of your emotional experience as something that is too much, as evidence of your irrationality or your sensitivity or your inability to manage your own interior life in a way that does not inconvenience the people around you. This pattern communicates something that requires very careful hearing because it is one of the most damaging communications available in an intimate relationship and one of the most difficult to hear clearly because it arrives not as an explicit statement, but as an accumulation of smaller moments that individually seem manageable and collectively produce something that is not manageable at all. The accumulation communicates this: your interior life, in its full dimensions, is not something this relationship has space for. The version of you that is acceptable within this relationship is the version that manages its emotional experience in ways that do not create demands on the person delivering the message. The version that feels what you feel and contains it sufficiently that the containing does not become visible as a need. And that communication, that the full version of you is too much for this relationship, is not something a relationship can be forgiven into changing. Because the relationship that does not have space for your interior life is not a relationship that is failing to live up to its potential. It is a relationship that has revealed its actual capacity, and its actual capacity is insufficient. Not insufficient in a way that more patience or more communication or more generous interpretation can expand. insufficient in the specific way that means the full version of you does not fit inside it and never will. And the full version of you is not optional. It is not something you can permanently edit down to fit a space that was never designed to hold it without producing the exact depletion and self-erasure that every other conversation in this space has been trying to help you understand the cost of. The sixth and final form of disrespect in this category is the one that connects everything else, and that is, at its deepest level, the common thread running through every specific form we have discussed. It is the refusal of genuine accountability, the consistent, pattern-level inability or unwillingness to receive the information that your experience provides about the impact of their behavior, and to let that information actually land, actually produce something in them, actually change the orientation from which subsequent behavior emerges. This refusal takes many forms, and it is important to be able to recognize them across their different presentations. Because the refusal that arrives in the form of an apology looks very different from the refusal that arrives as indignation, and the one that is dressed as an apology is considerably more dangerous because it is more convincing. The apology that is not accountability is identifiable by what it does not contain: a specific acknowledgement of what was done, a demonstrated understanding of why it caused the harm it caused, and behavioral evidence over time that the understanding is genuine rather than performed. An apology without these elements is a social gesture designed to close the conversation about accountability without the accountability actually occurring. It is the management of the moment rather than the reckoning with the pattern, and receiving it as though it were accountability, allowing the social gesture to close the conversation in the way that genuine accountability would close it, is the specific mechanism through which the pattern continues, because the pattern does not require the refusal to be obvious. It only requires that the accountability never actually occur. And accountability can be indefinitely deferred through the skilled deployment of the apology that looks like accountability without containing it. The recognition of this distinction between the apology and the accountability, between the gesture and the reckoning, is perhaps the single most practically useful thing this episode can offer. Because the forms of disrespect we have discussed are not rare. They are common. They are present in varying degrees and with varying frequency in a significant proportion of the relationships that produce the most significant damage in people's lives. And they are sustained in most cases, not by the deliberate cruelty of people who want to cause harm, but by the consistent, reliable, pattern-level absence of genuine accountability that allows the behavior to continue without the consequence that would make continuing it untenable. The never is the consequence, the permanent, negotiable, clearly communicated, through your behavior rather than your words. Revision of the access available to people who produce these specific forms of disrespect is the consequence that the absence of genuine accountability has always made necessary, not as punishment, not as retaliation. As the honest, accurate, finally arrived at recognition that the information these forms of disrespect have been providing about the people who deploy them is reliable, that it describes who they are in the relationship rather than who they are having a bad day, that it merits the response that reliable information always merits, the adjustment of your position to reflect what you now know rather than what you once hoped. And that adjustment, made clearly and held steadily, and not negotiated away by the next apology, that arrives without the accountability that would make it mean something. That adjustment is not the closing of a door. It is the opening of the space that the door was blocking. The space in which the relationships that are actually available to the full version of you have room to form. And that space, once created and once protected with the clarity that the never provides, is where everything worth having in your relational life has always been waiting.